I'm Alison McCauley. I work at Cornell. Cornell Drupal Camp is in September. I have palm cards. Ithaca is absolutely beautiful. I will not say gorgeous, if you know that area. Anyway, in the fall. So highly recommend. Okay. So again, this is a beginner level session. Just really want that to be there, I guess. So we're going to talk about what configuration management is, how to use it, using it with your sort of like dev test live workflow, putting that stuff into your code and some pain points. I'll briefly mention something about migrations and some helper modules and see what kind of lingering questions there will be. And time 2:04, okay. And there will be cute pictures of my dog. Yes, they are cute. Okay, so configuration management. Nope, JK, psych. First, has everyone here, who's used Drupal 8? Oh, good, okay. Who's used configuration management in Drupal 8? Cool. Who's used features in Drupal 7? Very cool. Configuration management in Drupal 7 isn't important, but I guess I put it there. So if you've used, so just thinking about these last two questions here, think about the tools you use or you want to be using. Think about your wish lists when you came into this session. And like just as we're going along, I'm guessing that you're here because you're hoping that your Drupal site building experience and maintenance life could be better than it is right now. So just think about what you wish you knew, what's causing you pain and suffering, what you're mad you haven't been able to figure out how to do in Drupal 8 yet, or maybe it's not possible. I'm not casing myself, sorry. All of that. And then questions at the end, obviously, but just try to keep those kinds of things in mind while we're going. Okay, now for real. So, first of all, CMI actually stands for Configuration Management Initiative. That's the last time you need to know that. So configuration management in Drupal 8 means, so all of your site settings go into the config table in your database. Yeah, that is that information. So obviously that's a lie, not everything is there. Don't worry, there are going to be site settings and you're going to think, but they're supposed to all, they're not, it's going to be confusing, it's not going to necessarily make sense that they're not there. That's life. So with Drupal 8, the configuration management system means that you have consistency specifically in the way that site settings are stored in a consistent manner. An example of that, here I have already put into the oven and I'm ready to show you my final product here. We have two queries here. All I'm doing is showing you two entries in the config table. So you can see this first one is the copy module configuration. The second one is the state format. But overall, I'm just saying that there's consistency in the way that the configuration data are stored. With all of these, oh, this is a string, it's this long, this is an integer, it's, etc. That's all we're saying, that everything that becomes a config entity in Drupal 8 is stored in a consistent way. Compared to features in Drupal 7, it's just similar concepts, that's all. I wouldn't worry too much about similarities overall, it's just similar concepts and goals. If you would like to learn more, here are some links about history and whatever. If you care, chime in. That's just generally a good idea. So this slides will be I think my old slides are on the session right now, so I'll put the updated ones on there right after we're done here. Okay, but what is configuration, or what are configurations, or whatever the words are? Well, I already explained it to you. It's everything that's in the config table. You're done. Congratulations. Jay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm very, very funny. What and how? Okay, so what are they? How do I use them? So, some examples here. The names of configurations kind of look like file names. That is, lots of periods. That's, so here are some examples of things. This first one has to do with what modules and themes are enabled or not enabled. The second one, this is your site-wide view module settings. And then the third one is an example of a configuration entity for an actual view. So that's what these examples are. Okay, here's a lot of text. Basically, I'm just saying some things that are, this top list are examples of things that have configuration entities. The bottom list are things that do not. So configuration entity, like really, if you would like to become more familiar with what these things are, you can do a full config export, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. And then you can just kind of skim through the files. That's if you want to, and actually, okay. So trickiness warning here. Non-custom block settings and block layout settings, that is where you place your blocks, those get configuration entities. Those become configuration. But the actual custom blocks are not configuration. They're like nodes and taxonomy terms, etc., user accounts. So that's just one example of trickiness. So I'm on slide 18. So if you have the devel module enabled, I should zoom in. How's that, zoom-wise? Good, okay. So if you have the devel module enabled, you can go to this menu, development, config editor. I'm just saying this as a place where you can, you can go and just see a list of all of the configuration that exists on your site if you just want to get a feel for, well, what configuration do I have? And there's a nice filter at the top. The other way that you can do it is if you do export all of your config to code, you can see a list of files. Look how long that list of files is. So many files. Okay? So just a general idea here. One other comment just about, like, as we're getting started on what things are. Configuration is tied to one site '(s), unique hash salt. So that's in your settings.php file or some variation of that. And the reason that that matters is that you can't, that means that you can't just export and import configuration from one site to another. So an example of that, here I have on this website, I've got my coffee configuration here. On this website, here's the other coffee configuration. Come on. Okay. This is not the same. Shoot. Use the same install profile to create it. That didn't happen. Okay, see how they're different? Sorry. I made labels for all of my tabs so I'd know where to go. I was so prepared. Anyway, on mouse. Okay. Anyway, so that's the only reason that the hash salt matters. You don't need to really know about the hash salt. It's something to know that means the implications are simply that you can't just export config from one site and import them to another from separate sites. Okay, now we're going to get to the good stuff. How to work with your config. So you can import and export, or export and then import single configuration items, like that coffee module settings. You can export and import full archives of all of the config of your entire site. That's that giant list of files, right? When you download it, it comes in an archive. You can edit things one by one in the config editor, and then you can do some things via Drush. So let's go through those things. By the way, I'm using Drush 8, just FYI. Okay, so examples. Slide 21. So this is an example of a single export screen. So I could say, okay, my config grouping is simple. I'm going to go to coffee configuration. This is my configure. So that's that information. Now let's say, imagine that I go, so I'm in my dev environment. Now I'm going to go to my live environment. I would say, I was going to do a view example. Okay, let's get that blog archive view, sure. This is the entire view, by the way. So if you've ever done a view export in Drupal 7, like this is what we're talking about here. It's the entire, all the everything. So if I created this view on my dev environment or updated it on my dev environment, then I can go to my test environment or my live environment. I go to, so now I'm on the import screen. And I'd go here and I'd paste it in, and I'd say import. So, sorry, and I did miss one step. This is located in the configuration area, development, configuration synchronization, and then there's import and export, and then you'd either see full archive or single item. So that's an example of doing it with, and so once I export it from, let's say this is my dev environment, if I import it into, let's say, my test environment or my live environment, all of those settings now exist on my test live environment. If I want to, let's say I have a whole bunch of changes that I made in my dev environment, I could export all of the configurations that exist on my site. It'll take a minute, it'll think really hard, and then it'll spit out an archive file, which I can, so again, we're in configuration. Oh my God, stop. Yeah, my mouse wouldn't go down. Anyway, and then import, and then you can import the full archive there. It's still thinking. It doesn't really matter what the file looks like, to be honest. There it is. See, it's going to make a tar.gz file. You've seen them before. And then you would, in this case, if you're going to import them all at once, you would import it just like that, allowed types, right? That's a good thing. So that's another way to do that. The next one was config editor, right? So let's say all I wanted to do was change, the resources, field resources. I want to change the field label on this, and for some reason I don't want to do a single export import. I don't know why. But I can actually click edit here, and now I'm looking at the config code. And I can find, so I'm going to look around for whatever the field label, that's right here, label resources. Okay, that's that right there. And I can just change it here. There might be another instance of it. I don't really recommend doing it this way, but I do want to let you know that it's here. There are other instances where it might be more helpful. My mouse is just everywhere. I won't go into, they're more advanced situations where you might need to do this kind of like really fine-grained updating. But so that's a way that you can make a change to a configuration entity one at a time, or just making one line of change. Then lastly, for this kind of fun stuff, I can also do, so on that slide, I said to see the available commands, you could say drush and then grep for anything that it has config dash in it. So in this case, I'm going to say drush cget config -get. Okay. Oh, okay, come on. That's not what it was called. Let's do this one then. Okay, so that's that whole field of everything. So I can also say drush config delete. If I want to do that, I can do config set. And I could, for example, I could pick out which thing I want to set manually and then set a value. You can see the exact syntax for that by doing drush help c set, unsurprisingly. So there are those kinds of things that you can do with drush. But wait, there's more. If you actually commit your configuration to your repository, so it's in your code base, you can do even more awesome things. For example, I'm on slide 2. There we go. Okay. For example, right now, because I have, so if I go right to, oh my God. just keeps jumping. Okay. Development, and then if I click right on configuration synchronization, I get to this page, which has a list of things that have been changed in my current environment compared to what they are in code. So it's similar to just when you look at your list of features in Drupal 7 and you see things are overridden, these are going to be those kinds of things. In this case, I have 3 things that have been changed. So I can also click import all and bring up and make my current environment reflect what is in code. So if I've made a bunch of changes and I put those changes into code and then I have them in my development environment and then I go to my testing or live environment to deploy those changes that I've already put into code, I would click import all. Another example. Oh, so that's the sync page. Similarly, I can say drush CIM, the config import. And it'll tell me, it'll tell me what's going to happen when I do that, and then I can say yes or no. I'm going to say no for right now so that I can have those still changed. But that's the same thing as being able to say import all. Okay, second tab. So another cool thing, if you have your configuration in code, is that you can see that things, now I'm on the same like synchronize page. Okay, I'm just in a different environment where I've made more changes so that I can show you more changes. So there's a section of things that are called new, a section of things that are called changed, and a section of things that are called removed. These words are not, I didn't find them very intuitive, to be honest. The idea is that, so the words that they're using are what is in code but not in your active environment. So new means that there's this field called field more links in code. So perhaps I added the field called more links in my development environment, and now I'm looking at the live environment and it says there's a new field in your configuration. So if I click import all, they will add that field. These are things that have changed between what's in my current environment and what's in code. And then at the bottom here, removed, that actually means that there are configurations, in this case it's a field, other resources not real, in my current environment that does not exist in code. So the way I think of these words is actually like, these are the verbs that will happen if I click import all. So if I click import all, I'll get one new field, all of these things will change, and I'll have these 2 fields will get removed. I know it's like a little weird, but that's that. And then the other great thing here is that you can click view differences, like a features diff. It's the worst possible example. How about here? Okay, so this is just showing me, sorry, on this side it says staged, so it's talking about the things that are in the code, and then on the left side it says active. So even here, I can see in code, the name of that field is called resources, but on my current active environment, I've actually changed the label to primary resources, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe previously the name of the field was primary resources, but I've since made a change in the code and now I want to deploy it up. So this will happen when I click import all. So those are the cool things going on here. View differences, that was the third thing. The only thing sort of comparable in Drush is that the operation changes. So if I had a new item, it would say create. If there was something getting removed, it would say delete. It's not really the same. There isn't a really simple way to just see the diff between the changes. Okay, so those are ways that you can work with your config if you commit your code. Flashback to a handful of minutes ago. I did say that that configuration management is sort of similar to features in Drupal 7. What did I mean by that? So in configuration management, it will let you synchronize all site settings between identical sites that are meant to be identical. So, for example, between your dev site, your test site, your live site, between your local environment and your live site, those kinds of things. So you synchronize all site settings between sites that are meant to be identical, not, this wildlife site and this teaching resources site. That's not the way it's meant to be used. Right, so between different environments of the same project, for example. Whereas features in Drupal 7 was meant to organize related configuration, maybe not even all of it, maybe just the stuff that you wanted to put into your code, and or to build reusable functionality. That was the intent. That's how people generally use features in Drupal 7. Back to the how. So I just want to mention, using configuration management between your dev, test, live environments. We sort of just talked about it here anyway. What's your process for changing and creating functionality? Do you have something like a dev, test, live workflow situation? Do you build stuff on a local environment or a separate branch like a multi-dev if you use Pantheon? And so what am I talking about? I am talking about this. Look, it says dev, test, live, or I have multi-devs. That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing I'm referring to. Is that something that you have? Or maybe it's really just from your local to the cloud. Either way, you're talking about moving things from one environment to another. I mean, obviously we could, oh, come on, load. Oh, sad. There we go. There, that was what I was supposed to say. Don't do that. Use configuration management. Oh, okay. So synchronizing between environments, what do I mean? I mean, you can use configuration management to synchronize site settings between environments of the same project. Kind of covered that. Mess with stuff, also known as developing, in your development environment, test things on your staging environment, and then go live. So that's the kind of the basic idea. I mean, that's how you probably do things anyway. You could just do it with configuration management instead of having to, okay, I made all these changes to my view. Now I'm going to go to the test environment or the live environment and click on all of those same things that I click on and hope that I remember them all. Instead of that, you'd export the config from your development environment and import it into your live environment. So either one at a time or as an archive, hopefully you're committing it to code, that kind of thing. So if you do commit it to code, then you have it sort of staged and ready to go, and then when you do a deployment to your live environment, then it's there and ready for you to say, okay, now we're going to import all, right? So site config in your code. It's so cool. So remember that Drupal stores active site configurations in the config database table, and you can record configuration in YAML files, .yml. Where did they go? Usually they go, in a lot of situations, they'll end up in site's default files or site default config or site default file sync. There's an example in settings, default.settings.php, settings.default.php that comes with core. So you can specify, if you are able to, you can put it outside of your project root if your hosting situation allows that. It's a great place for it. So you want to check with your hosting provider, and then you can specify where you want it to be in settings.php. You can look at the default settings.php file to see an example. Okay, so that was that part, that was the where. So remember that the config files are those same configurations that we've been talking about, but they're in YAML. So instead of that in the database where it said all those little, it's more like a JSON looking thing, or a var dump or something like that. So they're just in a YAML format, much easier to read. So remember those config names from the very beginning where we talked about this is for modules that are enabled, or any project that's enabled. This is your site-wide view settings. This is your events view. It's the same names, .yml. Huh, they did. They looked like file names, didn't they? There you go. See, full circle. Flashback. Oh, I meant to say this used to be in Comic Sans and it went away. It was supposed to be like a Comic Sans flashback. Okay. Anyway, so flashback to when we were talking about dev test live workflow. So it's the same idea, but in your code with config that's actually in your code base. So similarly, you just move it up the chain to the, we basically covered that. So taking a breath. Yes, I have that in my slide. Okay, so pain points. What pain points? No pain points. It's weird. Somehow I always have a use for this slide when presenting on Drupal, no matter what. First of all, this is just it makes me angry anytime I think about it. The import all has no confirmation screen. That you just hit an import all and it happens. If you do a single import, it actually confirms on a single import, but not import all. It's just what it is. Drush does confirm. As you saw here when I do drush config import, it does confirm. Thank goodness. But anyway, something to know. Backups. Other pain points. That's not this slide. That's why it's not moving. Okay, just getting familiar with the errors and warnings and just informative text. So there was I already talked about the headings, the new, changed, removed. I find it confusing. Another thing is when you've made change, so there is also this message that you'll find is at the top of the synchronize page quite often. All that means is that you have gone to some settings screens and hit save. That was sort of the case in features also. Sometimes things would become overridden even if you hadn't made changes. It was like the database was told the screen's been saved. So sometimes there are actual changes. In this case, there are lots of changes. But other times it just means you've saved the screen since the last import. So it may be lost on the next import, right? It's not maybe, maybe not. Really, this information down here tells you more about the actual status of your environment. Also, most of these pain points are just kind of Drupal things, or I guess life things. They're not, I don't really think they're that specific to configuration management. I don't think that they're, I think they're just general pain points. The UUID mismatches, it shouldn't just be annoying that you might get a mismatch even though you're working in the same. And so each configuration entity has a unique ID. Remember that one that was definitely different from the other one I showed you? This one here and this. So those are, that's not technically UUID. Maybe this one has it. Here, UUID. So, for example, when you have, so if you, let's say you turn on a module like coffee, actually, or some other one, I don't know. Some modules have configuration schemas that come with them and they just get turned on. Node access comes with a view with a list of all the nodes that are restricted or something like that. Things like that. So they create these config entities and sometimes they get their own UUIDs when they're created. And so then if you install them, if you enable the module in a different environment manually instead of just doing a config import, your UUIDs will match. That wasn't that interesting. It's really just, sometimes you're gonna have UUID mismatches and it's annoying. You can either just update your code to match whatever's on your live site, or you can actually target those UUIDs and change them manually using the configuration editor, just like going into the line and changing it, or with Drush or something like that. Blocks are annoying. Like I said at the beginning, the actual custom blocks with the content are not configuration entities. So you can imagine that that creates some issues when you have some things that are on your live site and you feel, even if you try to recreate them, unless you're pulling the database down often enough, which is a good idea, but not necessarily something that everybody does all the time. It can be annoying to learn the names of configurations. I recommend, if you can, I know some people don't like it, but if you have chosen, you can search for things. That's like pretty great, because otherwise when you're looking for configurations, it's alphabetical by, well, it's mostly, in this case it's alphabetical by the name. If I go to like a field, okay. If I go to a field, it is like kind of alphabetical, but it's by machine name, right? So like first it's going to go through all the fields that are on blocks, then media, then all these other things. Whereas if I have chosen here, I can search for, you know, the resources field that I want, you know, and see the content type. Another really good example actually is even in the configuration type section, you might think of oh, how about that editor? Text editor and text format. The actual machine names of these things, sorry, at the bottom of all of these, not that small, not big. You can see the machine names down here. So that's called filter.format, but in the list it's called text format, and then editor is called editor.editor, but it's called text editor. Would you really know to go all the way to the bottom of the list to find those? I don't know, but if you have Chosen, you can search for it. It's very handy. I highly recommend it if you can have Chosen on your site. So either you get to, with configuration, you either get to export and then import things all at once in those archives, or even if you don't use an archive, like exporting and importing everything all at once, or teeny tiny pieces at once, whereas with features, you could have them clumped together, right? So that's kind of a bummer. It'd be nice to be able to be like, okay, but I want to do all of the changes that I just made to this content type, but it comes out to like 10 or 11 configurations. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just, it can be kind of painful sometimes. Sometimes when you do a module update or core update, there are automatic configuration changes, and you might not actually notice them at first. Sometimes you have to save the screen to find out about them. It's just kind of a thing. So I try to remember, or don't always remember, I try to remember to go to whatever that module settings page is and just kind of save it and see if anything changes. Sometimes it's changing from true to 1 and false to 0, that kind of thing. Anything else here? Oh, and honestly, so eventually or immediately, you may find that it's just so much simpler than features. It weirded me out for a while that it was going to be like, what do you mean it's all in the same folder and I don't like bundle them into etc. It is so much simpler to just export and import everything. Once you get used to that being your workflow, it's just like, you don't have to, oh my God, remember like trying to plan out features like best practices for how to group things together, whether content type should go with views, and you just don't even have to. There are some more dogs. So why should you commit your config? You might be thinking, that was a lot. Why would I want to put myself through anything else? I mean, why do you commit other things? Anything, why don't you just SFTP all of your code all the time and not commit anything? And why do you commit things? Probably because you want version control so that you can undo things, and when you screw up, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's really the same reasons that you would commit anything else to your repository. Those are the reasons to commit configuration. Do you want to be able to undo things? Do you want to be able to go to your site? Let's say you have to go to your site and you're like, oh my God, right now you need to change that field label. And you're like, okay, I changed the field label on the production environment. You come back to the site later, 2 weeks or 2 days later, right? And you've already forgotten that you did that. If you have your configuration in code, when you go to the synchronization screen, it says, hey, this is different from code. I mean, that's great. So those are those things. Yeah, right. See, it's so cute. Some modules, configuration manager is the thing that's in core. So that's your first step, is to turn that on if you want to use configuration management, even if you decide not to commit these things to code, although I can't imagine why you wouldn't. But configuration manager, that's what you start. I think the machine name is simply config. Config ignore is super awesome. Which slide number? 45. Okay, so the config ignore module lets you tell it, configurations that you want to ignore. That means, XML sitemap, there's like a unique hash thingy that comes with the settings, and it's going to be different for each environment. That's annoying, so you can ignore that. So when you ignore something, it means it doesn't stay as part of your version control, so you want to use it when you need to and not when you don't. But sometimes maybe there's like for these LDAP servers, we didn't want to put the password into the code. So not only could we didn't even have to simply exclude all of the LDAP server configuration, we were able to exclude just this one variable, and it's very cool. Update, maybe you don't have dblog turned on your live environment, or maybe you do, but you're not keeping as many entries, that kind of stuff. So there's examples at the bottom. It's great. I love that module. Configuration split lets you, some people would, you could say that it's comparable to using, it's really just, you can have different settings in different environments. So if I show you this folder for this site, they have a different set of config, they have their config sync directory, which is anything that's the same on every environment. And then there are a few that are only on, so this is an Acquia site, there's some Acquia search things and stuff like that that has to be different on prod than on the dev environments. Maybe certain modules are enabled in the development environment, not the live environment. Config split lets you do that. It can get, you really want to be careful how you set it up. It can get confusing, it can get hard to maintain, but it is super valuable if you need to have things different from environment to environment, but you still want to, you can use config ignore, but if you want it to still be version controlled and saved and safe and all that stuff, you know, config split is a great option. Configuration update manager, there's nothing wrong with it, it just really wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I had the impression that it was going to be like a real, like a diff, that I was going to be able to see differences like from Drush and I don't know, and it actually, what it actually is it's for seeing and reviewing differences between your own site settings and the default settings provided by those modules. So it's really about modules from core or contributed modules that have their own configurations. You can see differences between those, which I guess if there's a module update and you want to see what's changed, it's not like evil. It just was not what I thought it was going to be. I just wanted to, since migrations are such a big deal now, basically, just we have a couple minutes left. Here's an example where you can look at, really you want to look for, just like other migration things, basically look in the module that you want to migrate settings for and see if they have a migrations folder. If they do, right, so this is core, this is the DB log module. There are these two different example migration plugins. If they have this, then you have a little demo right there of how to do it. So in the contrib module path auto, here's how you can migrate the, so I'm trying to talk about settings from your Drupal 6 or 7 site that will become configuration management entities on your new site, right? So they may or may not be available on a per module basis. Your best bet is to look in the module code and see if there are examples. And then there's this, on this slide, there's an example of doing it with the, what they use as an example is the DB log module. Skip that. These things. Yeah, so this discussion, I removed the word current at the top of the presentation, forgot it here. It was actually mainly a 2018 conversation that people were having on that thread. However, there is still this, an issue, if you go to that link, there's an issue tag CMI 2.0 candidate, and that is very active. So if you do look at this, you can see what discussions people were having up until last November, and then you can click on the issue tag and see, you know, what's coming, I don't know, what are people looking to do for the next generation of configuration management. I strongly urge you to, if you care, chime in. It's really, don't let the conversation only be between core developers. It's better for everybody, including them, if we all chime in. You don't have to be able to contribute a patch to be able to have an opinion there. And yeah. So I'll just leave this, I mean, really I want to leave this up, but if you promise to, you know, memorize that and whatever, I'll leave this up. That is, yeah. Any questions? Yes.
Configuring migration, and in the migration you need to create a new content type that you're going to migrate to. It seems you would put everything in the config files to make the new content type. Would there be any reason to update which within the install of that module?
Of your migration? Oh, sorry. So the question.
Create the new content type, can we just do the config? Or change
Yes, you can. So the question, I think, was if you have a new content type on your new site that you're migrating to, and you have a new content type that you're going to be migrating content from your old site to the new site, into that new content type, can't you just use configuration or even the Drupal UI to create that content type? Do you have to use an update hook in the migration? I'm sure it depends. I wasn't using update when, our last migration, I created them manually. There was no reason for me to do like a programmatic migration of content types. I know that there are instances where people need to use that, but I don't, does that help?
Can you create an entire new content type with the config files?
Yes, actually, it's actually just called, they're actually called node.type.name of content type. So, yes. Does that answer what you mean? Not necessarily. I wouldn't want to say that there's no such, you wouldn't necessarily need to put some sort of update hook in your migration scripts. Is that close enough? Okay. Any other questions right now? Yes.
What happens to your existing DB changes when you import new config?
Oh, okay. So you mean like when it says that there have been changes on this active environment? Like that? They're no longer there. They simply get replaced with whatever. So the database is updated with those settings. Yeah, so so if you were to look at, if I were to make a change to the copy settings via a config import, the value in the database would have changed when I come back in. So the config files are a way to version control your site settings, but the site settings that your site uses, they still pull it from the database. Sorry, I didn't repeat the question. What happens, the question was, I'm sorry, what happens to the changes that have been made to your database when you do config import?
Right.
Right, okay.
So if I make a change to the field name,
Yeah.
and then I import changes
Mhm.
to another field name in the same content type, is my existing database change
Yes.
maintained?
Yes.
And I do my import?
So if you make a change to a field name on one content type,
Right.
and then you import that same set of changes to that same field except on a different content type, you're
The
saying?
same content
Or the same content type?
Maybe a different field.
Okay.
What happens to that?
The original change?
Yes.
The only, okay, so if you make a change to the link field, the more links field, and then you import new settings for your resources field,
Right.
what happens to the changes that you made to the links field that you edited first?
Right.
Nothing will happen to that if you do a single import. Sorry, as I was saying it. If you do a single import, nothing will happen to that. If you do a complete import all, it'll definitely get overwritten. You'll lose the change that you made because it's gonna. So if you look at this entire screen, you'd have this field has a change, and then the other field, because your code is different, will also have a change. And if you click import all, it's going to make every setting on the site match what's in code. So that means that first field that you changed will now be back to what it was in code. Sorry, I hope that.
So if I have a bunch of changes I have made,
Yeah.
I have to go into the config stage folder and take all
Yeah.
the changes,
So
remove all the changes that I don't.
I do a full export. Should have picked a smaller site. Am I still online? Yes. Okay, so if I save this. How did it know? Okay, so that's there now. So what I would do is probably just delete the config folder that's there, and then extract it. It's a good question. I'd rename it. It's muscle memory at this point, and then I'd go to my terminal. Come on. And I'd see, come on. Let's see what's changed, right? And then I can choose maybe I didn't want to save the change to the links field. Oh my God, stop. To the links field, maybe I only wanted to save this, so I could check out those changes. You know what I mean? I could discard those changes and just commit, or I could simply add the change to this, right? And commit that change just to that field if I wanted to. Does that speak to that? Okay. Any other? Yep. I'm sorry? Yep, it would be like any other configuration. So the question was, can you delete a content type, I imagine, via config, you're wondering? Yeah, so if the file, if I delete this file, and then I go to the configuration.
Won't let you get content.
I'm sorry?
Won't let you get content in the database, right?
Oh, that's true. It might be angry because there are items of that. I think that, so he was saying that it might not let you delete it because is content in that content type. I feel like if I do it via Drush, it lets me. Okay, that's unnecessary. I feel like maybe with Drush, it lets you do that more destructive kind of activity, but not in the, okay, I don't know what I did, but yeah. Was there another question? Does that, okay. Okay.
The UUID is in the settings.php file you said?
The hash salt is in the settings.php file. UUIDs are specific to each configuration entity.
So what happens if I also have to get the hash salt and then settings file?
What happens if your hash salt is the same, is not the same as the development? That's a great question. So if your hash salt is different in, for example, your local environment than it is in your development, staging, or live environments, you're going to just explode. It's not going to work. No, because the UUIDs simply aren't going to match. So they have to be the same. But you can set it manually. You should be able to set it manually in a settings.local.php file, things like that. Or if you clone the database down to your local, you'll be all set from the start.
What I have
Sorry? Yes, but it looks at that. If I recall correctly, the settings.php is not in the database, but I'm pretty sure the site looks at settings.php to know who it is as a unique individual. Sorry. Yep.
What I have done was to remove the UUID from my Yahoo
Yep.
file and import it. It will let you import, and then it gives it a new
Okay.
UUID.
She's saying that what she's done is remove the UUID from the config YAML, and then it applies the UUID that it thinks it should be using on that active environment. Another thing you can do if you do have mismatched UUIDs is to, manually change them. But you'd have to do it for it wouldn't be a sustainable plan if you're talking about everything. But it's definitely happened to me with block layout settings. And then I have to, wait, this clock's not real. Sorry, VM situation. What was I saying? Oh, in a block layout, if you have a piece of custom block content in one environment and then you added it separately to another environment, you're going to have a mismatch of many things, including UUIDs, when you place that block. So you can manually just change the UUID. I usually do it via Drush with a config set command, and then I say UUID, change the UUID to this. In my local environment is probably the way I would do it, but I know that's kind of techy. I'm happy to explain it more after. Last question. Okay, yep.
When you want to bundle a config as part of a module,
Yeah.
if you change the config on the UI, do you have to, and then you export, it goes into your sync.
Yes, that's right.
So do you have to get it back into the module, you have to manually copy it? It doesn't go in there automatically?
So if you have I imagine a custom module that has configurations in it, when it's then on your site, and then if you export those changes, it goes into your config sync, not back to the module. And that's just like a contributed module that comes with configuration, like in the installation schema stuff. It's the same concept. So yes, if you want it to be back in the module, you manually do that separately. You kind of consider it part of your module maintenance. Yeah. And I'm going to stop because there's somebody else. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.